Easy everyone. In this part of the course I'm going to demonstrate how incremental stages of saturation, limiting, soft clipping and tube distortion can help us to increase the perceived volume of our sounds or reduce the peak volume of them for a more powerful mixdown. So for me, one of the most important parts of a drum and bass mixdown is the drum group, and I'll be using Ableton's stock saturator, stock limiter and glue compressor, as well as Camel Fat, to demonstrate the techniques that I use to increase the perceived volume or power of the drums so that I can get a better final mix down and master in my drum and bass tracks. All of the techniques I'm going to be using can be done on other third-party plugins or the stock effects in any other DAW. They're fairly standard processes. So to start with, I'll just show you these drums without any processing on the group. I've just taken them from a track that I'm working on at the moment with Wolf. So this is the drum group. I've got subgroups in the drum group. So we've got a kick snare group, hats, high tops and perks, and these two groups are basically so that I can do some side chaining if I want, and the main thing here is the overall drum group. So I'll just play it through. So we're peaking at minus 14.8 decibels there. I've set the fader of the drum group to minus 10 because that is basically going to be what I want my ceiling or my maximum peak volume to be for my drums. So I often start my mix downs with the drums. I get them independently balanced as I sort of like them according to my ear. So basically solo the drum group and do a mix down of just my drums, and then that group will then have processing on it, and then once I've got my drums sounding good and I'm happy with them, I'll then mix everything else in with the drums. So it's usually my starting point for a mix down in drum and bass. It is one of the most important parts of the track. It's in the name of the genre, drum and bass, so they are two very important parts of the track. So I focus on the drums to start with and then go from there, and I find that it works best for me. So I always have my drum group at minus 10 decibels and make sure that all of the individual channels going through into that drum group are quiet enough that I've got some headroom, so I'm not going above the volume I've got on the fader. Nothing is going through the red or clipping in my DAW. So once I've got a drum group and it's balanced and I'm happy with the overall mix of the drum sounds, I've got a few options as to how I can beef those drums up and keep my 10 decibels of headroom. So the first one that I'll demonstrate is using Ableton's saturator. So this has got a soft clipping engine, and basically we can turn that on and then just drive the input of the saturation. And no matter how much we drive this, the output won't go above that 10 decibels. So you can see there it's really saturated, too much, but still minus 10. So the trick is to take it till it's a bit too much, then take it down till it's not enough, and find a nice halfway point where you're getting a good amount of drive but you're not totally ruining the sound of your drums. So I think on these drums around about 10 decibels of drive sounds pretty good. What I'll do is, if I put the output on this down to minus 5, it will take the peak volume back to what it was roughly before I put the saturator on, and we can compare the difference in sound without a change in peak volume. So this is just showing the difference in perceived volume. So we've not lost any headroom, and the drums sound louder to the ear. So going back to what I said in the start of the course about loudness, peak volume, perceived volume, this is very much that principle in practice here. So we can use the saturator to do that. We can also use Ableton's glue compressor, as it also has a soft clip engine, and you'll get a slightly different sound compared to with the saturator. So on drums for this, I like to put the attack up to 30 so that the initial transient doesn't get compressed and it comes through. And then I'll bring the release down quite low, leave the ratio at 4 for now, and then I'll bring the threshold down so I'm getting a little bit of compression, and then drive that makeup gain through the soft clipping engine. I'm just going to put a utility here to get the peak volume back to -15, just so we can do a comparison. So this is with it off. So the drums again sound louder, more powerful, but we've got just as much headroom in our mix. And all I mean when I say headroom is how much of a gap there is between the peak volume of our drums and 0 decibels. So in this instance, we've got 10.5 decibels of headroom, which is roughly what I look for in my drums. So yeah, that's the glue compressor. We can also use a limiter to do this. Now, I don't often use Ableton's stock limiter, but you can use it. There's nothing wrong with it, I don't think. I just prefer to use FabFilter limiters, but for these purposes, I'll just stick with the stock limiter just to demonstrate the theory. So I'll put the ceiling on. Actually, I don't need to use this utility. I'll put the ceiling here on -5. And then as I crank the limiter, we'll hear the change in perceived volume and dynamics of the sound. So just another tool that you've got there to increase the perceived volume of an individual sound or a group of sounds. I personally like to do little increments of a couple of these processes rather than relying too heavily on one or the other. But certain tracks and certain sounds will respond better to different processes, so just experiment. The final plugin that I'll use to demonstrate what I do on my drum group is Camel Fat. So it's an old favourite of mine. I'll just load it up and clear the initial presets. I've got a blank preset, and turn on the distortion section and just drive the tube distortion. And use the compressor on it as well if we want. Maybe a little touch of this mech one, although you've got to be careful with it. So this is without. So there's another tool that you can use to beef your drums up, make them a bit more powerful. And I find that's, yeah, as I said earlier, a great way to start your mix down is just getting your drums on their own sounding really nice and punchy and fat with a nice amount of headroom, sort of at least 10 decibels. And then yeah, we can start sort of layering and building the track together based around those drums. So I hope that has helped, and you can now sort of get your drums sounding a bit fatter. And yeah, enjoy.